now that everyone has started to do their research, they are finding out buying Canadian is not as straightforward as we had hoped. First of all, what does it mean to buy Canadian?
Well, the Canadian producers have labels, so they're the product of Canada, which means that the product has about 98% content or more in Canada. Then there's made in Canada, which means that at least 51% of the value added comes from Canada.
You know, on food, that seems more straightforward. Plus, the grocery stores are really helping us out with that. But when we look at other products, like beauty products, for example, their labels aren't as clear. So how can consumers tell if this is a Canadian product?
Well, they look for the label that says product of Canada, made in Canada, but really from a consumer standpoint, the purchases fall into one of three buckets. So first of all, it's not available in Canada, so that might be consumer electronics, for example, in terms of being made in Canada. You've got product that is available in Canada, so it might be certain food products on an annual basis, wine, clothing, furniture. And then there's products that are available some of the time, and an example of that would be fresh fruits and vegetables.
What about for things like clothing, Fraser? So when you're looking at something that might have been designed somewhere else or designed in Canada, made somewhere else, where do you fall in the lines of that?
Well, this is where consumers need to do their research, because we've got some great Canadian clothing brands like Canada Goose and Roots, for example, but quite often these companies outsource production of their products to overseas companies. So you really have to check the label on the product when you're buying it, and sometimes you can do that in advance. There are online resources that consumers can use. So there's one website called madeinca.ca, for example, which can help consumers through that process of determining what is made in Canada and what comes from other parts of the world.
How difficult is it for Canadian businesses and manufacturers to build and create products fully made here in Canada?
It's very difficult. It's difficult to pivot and disentangle supply chains that have been set up literally for the last several decades, just because of, will probably be a short-term event in terms of the trade dispute with the U.S. The difficult part of this is that Canadian businesses looking to expand in terms of buying capital, increase production, put money into new product development, really don't have any clarity in terms of what the future looks like. So it makes it very difficult from a business planning perspective.
Listen, you would know this, and everybody knows this as well. Provincially, it is a lot easier just to ship things an hour south of the border than it is to go from Ontario to BC. But there are more calls now politically to reduce those interprovincial tariffs here in Canada. How much of a difference would that make to our economy to not be selling south, but to be selling east-west?
Yeah, the opportunities that I read in the various reports are, between 3 to 4% bump up in our GDP. And really, the trade dispute with the U.S. is independent of the interprovincial trade barriers. And I've long argued that, we need leadership at the federal, provincial levels to be able to resolve these issues and make the country more competitive internationally.
I want to just give everybody, everybody's information, and the sharing that's happening on social media is, where can I find a list? What are I want to purchase non-American products, not even just Canadian, but non-American. And so people have been putting up these lists of well-known Canadian companies. So we're going to throw one up as well. These are ones that come up a lot. Dairyland, Saputo Cheese, Great Canadian Meat Company, Woodsack, Pelee Island Wineries. Are there some others that you can think of?
Well, I think on the food side that, we got some great Canadian food companies like Maple Leaf Foods and McCain Foods, for example. There certainly are smaller producers. I think that, if you go to some of the name brand products in some of our stores like President's Choice and Compliments, those are usually good bets as well in terms of local products, local being Canadian made.
I want to ask you quickly about big chains, because things like fast food, for example, while a company like McDonald's might not be Canadian owned, they do use either Canadian potatoes or Canadian beef. So what can consumers do in a situation like that?
Yeah, those are a little trickier. And I think that part of the process here is to take a look for substitutes. So, if you're used to getting up in the morning and having a glass of Florida orange juice, and maybe you can look at apple juice as a possible alternative, apple juice which is made in Canada. And but the reality here, Anne Marie, is that which we should really talk about just quickly, is the financial implications of these decisions. Sometimes Canadian-made products are more expensive, and Canadians have been through a period, the last 4 or 5 years, where we've had tremendous food inflation, and a lot of people are just worried about putting food on the table for their families.
Well, that's exactly it. And a lot of those Canadian name brands are expensive brands, and we're in an affordability crisis. Groceries are already too expensive for most families. They're skipping meals. Fraser Johnson, great to have you with us this morning. Lots to think about and research. So thanks for helping us do that.
Thanks for having me on.